at Metropole TVKE across all your social media platforms. 20146 is our SMS line. Hashtag business. Welcome to your sector trends this morning. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating impact on low and moderate income populations, macro, small and medium enterprises and more areas around the world. Now, with limited net worth and savings to fall back on, coupled with a squeeze on access to finance, these segments faced severe disruptions in demand and payment cycles. Now, this has led to challenges around business continuity and survival. In view of this, MicroSave Consulting, with support from other generous donors as Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Metley Foundation, Swiss Capacity Building Facility and MasterCard Foundation, conducted a research exercise to assess the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on those areas that we have mentioned. Now, looking at this, let's discuss the impact, therefore, of COVID-19 on medium and small-sized enterprises in Asia and Africa. All right, to help us this morning, therefore, get this conversation into proper perspective, we are joined by Akhand Tiwari, Associate Partner at MSC. Akhand, how are you doing, sir? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me on this morning.
Thank you as well for agreeing to do this. The first question that anybody is going to ask you, would you say that, well, the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic across those areas that your research touched on have been similar, or they are specific to the different areas?
I mean, it's a good question. Before I plunge to directly answer this question,
yes.
Let me also very briefly tell you that we studied two specific segments. The low and middle income households and the micro and small enterprises amongst these households as well. We tried to understand the knowledge, attitude and practice with regards to how the LMI population is understanding and taking COVID, the impact on income and also the impact and the changes in their digital behavior.
Yes.
And with regards to these small enterprises, the impact COVID had on the business and of course on digital adoption.
Yes.
As the case is, the impact on LMIs are, sort of similar across the countries, although the trends, while the trends are similar, for example, we find more awareness in Kenya. I mean, almost 48% respondents in Kenya could tell the top three symptoms of COVID: cough, fever, and breathlessness. Compare this with Uganda, it was close to 20%. It was much higher in the Asia side on these parameters. With regards to use of mask, again, it was sort of very limited. In Kenya, there is 20%. In Kenya, 90% people use masks. Yeah, those sort of, but the in similar LMIs, living in cities, come to rural areas, since everyone increased for everyone. Reduced to 65% in Kenya. So those trends, existed, it existed more for Kenya. Let's say 65% in all Kenya, but 30% in India. So
yes,
that sort of difference does exist.
Yes, and what would you say leads to this difference? Is it because of the way in which our economies are also different? You like to say that developing economy will be more hard than what we say is probably an economy on a different level?
I think, again, so it actually depends. It also, and the number one factor here would be how much the pandemic struck in the country.
Yes.
The population density of the country.
Yes.
So the actions which the governments took. So for example, in India, the government went into a nationwide lockdown quite early. since March. Many governments started it later. The type of packages which the governments introduced. I mean, again, in India, for the first 3 months, rupees 500 subsidy was given to all the almost 200 million PMJDY, which is one of the Anufril's account in India, was given out. Similarly, we see that in Bangladesh and Indonesia, similar sort of programs were launched. Also, the timing when the national lockdowns or these containments were taken off, because it had a direct impact on mobility of the people.
Yes.
And which directly relates to footfall in the shops, etc. These additional packages which various governments announced, they also help. I mean, in one of the studies as part of these COVID studies, we found that in India and in Bangladesh, almost 60 to 70% people said that they have received the benefits which the governments have announced.
Yes. All right. Let's cross over to exactly where we saw the COVID-19 pandemic really hit households pretty much. We're talking about the lower middle income households. This is the one that really bore the brunt of the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, did you see it across the areas again that you actually touched on in your research?
See, yes. And, again, just to paint this picture better, because close to 18% in Kenya, they
Yes.
lost their jobs.
Yes.
Right? Close to 59% reported a reduction in business, or 25% said that their owners have stopped working. Now, all of these meant that while the incomes were decreasing for these households, the expenses, the burden of household work kept on increasing, specifically with regards to, I mean, if we talk about women. Another thing that we saw was that the share of the work that they were doing, it kept on increasing, and almost in both rounds we saw that the burden of household work for women was higher. Another phenomena, I mean, again, something which was very pertinent to low and middle income households, the businesses which were owned by women, they suffered more, because otherwise in general they were going, I mean, in a non-pandemic period, they were doing household work, but they were also attending to their own business. But now, because of reduced business, increased work at home, they were the first ones to stop their own business or the enterprise that they were working on. So the pandemic impacted LMIs significantly, and they impacted women in the LMI segment even more.
Yes. All right. Which therefore begs the question. We have started 2021, and we've seen the way in which Europe has responded to that. USA has been responding to that as well, talking about economic package one after another. I mean, someone want to ask you, what would be the better response from the government in your research areas, especially to the lower middle income households? What could really be done so that they don't continue feeling the economic effects of the coronavirus pandemic as we start 2021?
So, great question. So the governments have done a fairly good job until now.
Yes.
To support the families. I mean, in different contexts. I mean, either it was these support packages, or it was all the efforts in these awareness campaigns. For example, in hashtag new pushing everything. And then that's see all these results in 90% of the respondents saying that they wear a mask. I wanted to bring this out because it is critical to highlight that the governments have been doing their bit. I think in 2021, what something that will work would be governments focus on, let's say, creating a digital platform, a public infrastructure sort of digital platform.
Yes.
And there have been instances when the governments have done it, I mean, in the pre-COVID areas. But now we saw that most of the MSMEs, they actually started adopting social commerce, WhatsApp commerce, businesses on those platforms. But they all need handholding, specifically these smaller, micro enterprises which work on these platforms. So government actually could invest in a public infrastructure like this now with much more grit and gumption, and say, that, we will support these micro enterprises on these platforms. They have to create this better market. Another thing which the governments can do, and I mean they have been doing, and I'll tell you this story from Bangladesh and on how they have been doing, is improving the access to credit for these micro enterprises.
Yes.
So what happened is all these stimulus packages have been announced, and the banks in the countries, they have been asked to implement these packages. The government in Bangladesh was very quick to realize that the banks will not be able to reach these micro enterprises. So they have actually modified the guidelines. Now they are serving these micro enterprises via microfinance institutions. So, of course, the fund is still being channeled through the banks, but now they will be given to micro enterprises via a microfinance institution. A
Yes.
microfinance institution is generally, and a credit or a saving institution, which gives loans to a group of women or men, depending on the context. So they have a better outreach in rural areas. So I mean those sort of program changes we will see happening, in 2021. I would also like to quote, this work from Indonesia. I mean, the government there has started a skilling program. Now, skilling will be very critical, and I mean, I think all the governments in 2021 will focus on the skilling program. Close to 6 million people in Indonesia, they have either are currently enrolled in the full
Yes.
skill development program or partly in the skill development program. And close to 35% of Indonesians have actually gotten their jobs back because they had now these modified and new skills. So again, digital platform infrastructure, support on credit and skilling program would definitely be the focus and should be the focus areas for the governments.
Pretty much. Let me just.
And I would
Yes. Yes. Just go on.
sure, go ahead.
Yes.
No, I actually wanted to add one more bit to this, and this is very critical. Various governments have announced the cash benefit transfers. I think it will be critical for all these cash benefit transfers to be a bit more gender centric in their approach. I
Yes.
mean, these are greatly designed, well thought of, but there are nuances on how women will actually access it, how they will, get the support on or troubleshooting, or they would be able to raise grievances. This is something which these programs have been missing out. They do not realize, various norms and norms related barriers or generic, cultural barriers which would
Yes.
prevent, a good user experience for these women when they access these cash benefit programs. So I mean that could also be and should also be one of the areas where government should focus on,
Pretty.
making these cash transfers more gender centric.
Let me take you back to exactly even what you're mentioning right now. I mean, your report finds out that when we're talking about the effects of the coronavirus pandemic, women, despite them being in business, which is quite a positive thing, again, that you can actually see from your report, we are still treating them as a special group, Akhand, that when it comes to them getting affected or when something happens in the economy, they tend to receive the brunt of it. Is this across the board, Akhand? And what do you think? There's this statistic from a report that women are the ones who receive the brunt of the COVID-19 pandemic, despite us talking about digitization and this century's economy, which doesn't care your gender or your area that you are from.
So first of all, it is definitely a trend across the geographies. I mean, we
Yes.
see this thing happening everywhere, and I mean, we have been into discussions with various experts, and we realize that somewhere this COVID has actually undone all the progress which various organizations have made over the years, and this happened because ultimately when the COVID struck,
Yes.
women were the first ones to, I mean, start staying at the house more, and of course because of the caregiving work that the women usually pick up in the households, and that has been a norm, good or bad, of course. I mean that we always discuss that, but I mean the workload on them increased. So even when we would say we are doing XYZ things for women, or specific programs for women, because of the constraints, because of other extremely important activities, they won't be able to access those programs. I mean, an interesting trend, time on the phone increased for both men and women during the COVID time. But of course, it increased more for women. I mean, depending on countries, the percentage gap is between 15% to 7%. I mean,
Yes.
for fewer women, the time on the phone increased. And I mean, again, access to resources within a household. If there is a smartphone, specifically in the Asian side, if there is a smartphone, the men and the children would have first access rather than a woman. So even if you are, let's say, thinking about a micro enterprise support program that allows women to, let's say, use social commerce or WhatsApp commerce, I mean, we'll have to first ensure that the woman has access to the smartphone. And by the way, very interesting phenomena, giving free phones does not work. I mean, it has to be a much thoughtful and a carefully thought program which needs to be put in place.
Pretty much. All right. Let's move on to exactly what you mentioned as well, that the recovery process, especially when we're talking about the MSMEs in the areas that your report touches on, you say that governments have to respond. And there's this critical area that you're mentioning, that it is access to suitable financial services and support to formalize the informal enterprises. You mentioned that. But what would you assess the access to finance pre-COVID? There was this talk about how Africa was making better steps towards financial access, especially for medium and small enterprises, and the formalization of businesses. Did COVID undo that? And if it did, how? And where are we now when we're talking about access to suitable financial services?
So first of all, yes, COVID did undo that, and more so because all those digital journeys which many of these micro enterprises were taking up,
yes,
they were set back. And because see the way the current business is moving, the current supply chain, all of this determine how a person is going further in the business and let's say making this business more of a formal business. But when the business reduced, the supply chains got disrupted, all of this journey got disrupted as well. So of course a lot of digitization or formalization of economy which was happening specifically for these micro enterprises, it was actually undone during the pandemic period.
Yes.
Now, and same thing happens for access to credit as well, because of low business, many micro enterprises were not able to pay their loans. Governments announced a moratorium period in almost all the countries. What that meant was that MFIs or the institutions which were providing credit to these micro enterprises, they also took a backseat. They were also very careful in providing credit to these micro enterprises. Now, without this push of access to funds, etc., the enterprises would not grow. Here, what the governments, again, I mean, if I understood your question really well, if the government's role would be to support access to credit in terms of identifying various support services to the credit providers, to MFIs, to banks which are targeting these micro enterprises. The idea here, I mean, there has to be a game plan. Now, the idea here should be that, of course, these micro enterprises were on a digital adoption pathway. The journey got disrupted, but now let's give more thirst to it. Let's try and make a holistic package where there would be need of support systems, especially more for women enterprises, so that they are able to use these digital devices, these digital interfaces. Ultimately, the idea should be that there are more digital footprints for these micro enterprises, and when there are the more digital footprints, access to credit will automatically increase.
Yes.
And even in the because in virtual settings, the credit providers will be able to access and assess data and assess the credit worthiness of a micro enterprise. Okay, this enterprise has such a cash flow, and I should be able to give him or her so much X amount of credit. I mean, all those aspects will improve, but it needs that digital journey needs a push, and I mean, both the government and other private players, they need to come on board and work on this path.
Yes. Just as we move towards the end of this conversation this morning, I mean, let me just end on that as well, because that's really a pertinent conversation. When do you expect expect that, well, the fortunes of the COVID-19 related disruptions are going to settle in 2021? I mean, in the entire of 2020, we're looking forward to 2021. We are there now, officially in it. This is the first quarter of it. When do we expect for the, I would say, the status quo to return the same that one that we had pre-COVID-19?
Again, I mean, yeah, actually it will depend. In some businesses,
Yes.
we are seeing that they have reached to almost 60 to 80% of their pre-COVID levels.
Yes.
But some businesses, specifically in the services industry, I mean, they're not at that level. Actually, and what time it will take to reach a pre-COVID level or even, improvise on that, only time will tell. But what I can definitely say is that if the governments continue to support these micro enterprises and these LMI with the activities that they have been, doing so far, we might see that the recovery could be sooner. I mean, I would only say that because, in different countries, the contexts are also different. Maybe I'd like to add one more point that, these masks campaigns would be
Yes.
very critical. I mean, something that we can learn from, India, and we can replicate in other geographies. I mean, that will be also good, because when people have these masks and they are, wearing these masks, and they are, having this confidence that, okay, now I am taking all the precautions, perhaps the market will recover faster.
Pretty much. Akhand Tiwari, Associate Partner, MSA, thank you very much for taking your time this morning to speak to Metropole Television on assessing the impact of COVID-19 on MSMEs in Asia and Africa entirely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The pleasure is mine. Have a good day.
Nice one on that. We take a short break, but once we come back, the economic review, where we're telling you the biggest headlines that you're waking up to this morning. Good morning.